Hi class, this video will give you will demo the sample solutions for Lab 10 Task 1, which is using PHP session in JavaJam Coffeehouse. So for Task 1, basically we want to focus on how to apply PHP session to handle the user login. If you have gone through the lecture notes, you will be aware that the reason why we have to use the sessions is because HTTP is actually a stateless protocol. That means that there is no way that HTTP can handle the state between two transactions. If there are multiple users using the web applications, we cannot, if you only base on the HTTP didn't give you a way to differentiate the request came from which users. So in order to control the user sessions, in PHP we use some of the PHP session functions, and the concept of sessions will help us to track the user during a single sessions on the website. So if you look at this diagram in the lecture notes, you can see that we will have multiple users using our application. So each user will be given a specific track, like sessions, what we call sessions, to access the content that only specific for their personalized content. So after they log in, we will be able to only shows the content that according to her authentication level, and also some of the web pages or some of the let's say to keep the items that added to the shopping cart. If the user didn't log in after they have closed the browser, the information will not be stored. But if let's say the user already logged in, we will be able to store the user informations and also keep the informations in our database after the user log out. The information can still be there because we can use the sessions as a server-side informations. So this server-side information, we will try to keep some unique identifier from specific for this user. Then after that, pass the information to the web server. So for example, if you see in this example, if we are using an online shopping system, each user will have their own sessions of which handle their specific shopping cart. And this information later we can connect to the database and store the information specific for this user. So when the user closes the website and when the sessions ends, your website, you cannot no longer access this particular page because you already logged out from the system. So we have to destroy or unset the sessions so that any other people who are using your computer will not be able to see see the contents that only the login user can see. So this is the usage of having session. So in the lab, we will have a simple solution, simple way of how we can implement session to handle our login. So basically, for us to handle a login, you need to first of all you create a new folder and call JavaJam 8 and copy all the files from your previous the Lab 9 folder JavaJam 7 into this new folder. And you also need to create two new PHP files. The one file is processlogin.php. The second one is logout.php. So when the user fill out the form login.php, we want the data sent to the processlogin.php. So remember in your login.php file, the actions, right, you have to change it to action equals to processlogin.php. And the method that we use is post method because when we enter the login, right, the users will submit the email and also password, and this information should be hidden, shouldn't be shown in the URL. So we cannot use get method in the login form. We have to use the post method, and the actions you need to specify the script that will do the processing for us. So we will create a new PHP file called processlogin.php to handle the login. In task A, open the new file that you have created, processlogin.php, and write the following PHP codes. First of all, you have to include the database connection file. So this is what we have learned before in the previous lab. So we already have write a config file here. So the config file consists of the database information and also help us to establish the connection using the database information, and also have the code that will handle the connection errors and send the error message to the user. So in the process login file, remember to include your database connection. So my config file, I have created a folder called includes folder. So and keep it in keep the config file here. That's why my link is include/config.php. So after we have include the database connection file, later we can connect this our PHP script to connect to the database in order to check whether the login details are valid or not. So this is the first thing you should do, include the database connection. Second thing, since after login, we will need to create a new session. So this, in order to use the sessions, we have to call the session start command. So in your code, you need to start a new session using session start. So this will help us to initialize the session start. Either for process login, we will start new sessions. For other files that we only can access after login, you also need to run the session start. But the session start here means that we are going to resume the existing sessions. That means after login, whatever pages that we want to use session to control, to check, only the login users can access, then we must indicate use the session start. So after you include the session start function, next thing, define new variables to store username and password sent from login.php page. So define variables. So in this example, I have defined user email and password, these two variables, to store the data sent from the login form. In this, since we are using the post method, so we must use the super global post method and pass in the name from the login form. So it must be exactly same as the name that you define in the login form. So for password, in the login form, I'm using the name equals to password. So your super global array must use the exact name that we have defined in the login.php. Okay, so these two variables has been created to store the information passed from the login page. Next, we want to write the codes to validate whether the login is valid or not. So to check whether the login is valid or not, we will check against the data that we have already, the users that already registered. We already store the user information in the database. So we need to connect to the database and the table, the user table, to do and the member table in order to do the checking. So we need to write the MySQL and select SQL statement to check whether the username and password exist or not. So you remember, we will use the select statement to do the checking, to retrieve the username and the email and password registered for this particular user. So if the login is valid, we will register the session variables. So when if you have go to the just quickly shows you when we start the sessions, right? Session is a super global array. So super global array sessions will allow us to also define set session variable. So you can define your unique name for each session variable. So in this example, you can see that they have defined favorite color, the variable name to store the favorite color of the user by favorite color of this user. which is green color. And there's another variable that has been set in these sessions, favorite animal, to store the user's favorite animal. In our context, we want to have three variables: login, user ID, and user email. So this one, right, the variable names that I put here, this one, it depends on what is the variables that you have defined in the program. So you pass in the right variable name that you have used. So these are just example. The variable name, this is the variable. The focus is the variables name that we want to create to store this to register the new session information. For login, we want to set the status. If valid, we set the login status equals to true. For user ID, we will pass in the user ID that we retrieve from the database table. For user email, it should be equivalent to the user email that you have defined as a variable in your PHP code to store the information, the email passed from the login form. So after login, we want to register the session information, and next we want to write code to redirect the page to profile.php. So this is actually this is the after we have redirect to the profile, we use the header functions to specify the locations that we want to redirect. We redirect to profile.php and also use the get method. When you see question mark right in the URL, that means that we are using the get method to pass some information to the next page. We in this case we have defined a new key call action, and the values we want to indicate that the login is successful. So we actually indicate login underscore success as a status information, and this is the key. So remember, when we pass information to any page, we will define a key, and this is the value. So this is the key value pair. If invalid login, we will not create the sessions. You don't need to do this. You only need to redirect the page to login page, and again use the get functions to pass the action value. So this is the key action, and we want to pass the value login failed to indicate that this is unsuccessful. So now I show you the code here. So remember, after you include database, after you start the session, now we will proceed to validate the login. We already defined the variables. Now you have to write, we will write a SQL statement. This is the variable SQL that we have defined the SQL statement, a select statement. So this select statement will select all from members table where email equals to user underscore email. So we want to cross check. So the name here must be exactly same as the table name that you have used. Okay, we have used the name, email, password in the members table. So must be exactly same as the attribute name in your members table. So we want to check the email equals to the user email sent from the login file, and we also want to check whether the password equals to we want to check whether there is any members exist with this email and this password or not. So this result, this will be we will execute the query using the query functions. So this is because we are using the object-oriented method. So a new connections object has been created in our config file, and we use the same variable here and call the query to execute the SQL statement. So the result we will store in a new variable called result. From here, we utilize the number rows to check whether how many rows that we have written from the members table. If more than 0, that means there is a record exists. If then that means that we know that this username and this user email and password exists. That means this is a valid login if the result is more than 0. And so we will proceed to register the user in the session. So remember, we will in this example we will use the fetch association to in order to retrieve each of the informations from the database. So here we have user ID. These are the informations that we have retrieved. User ID, name, email, and password from the table already because we put select all. So now we have defined a new variable res to store in order to store each of these informations that we retrieve from the database. So we want to keep the user ID, name, and email, and I have defined variable to store these informations that I retrieved from the SQL statement. So this is exactly same as the database the members table attribute name, and we also this is actually a testing a test statement just to do the when if you want to do the checking, you can print it out. But actually you can comment this part because this is actually for testing purpose. Whether I have saved the right user ID, name, and also email or not. So after I define variable to store to fetch the information from database, we register the the session variables. So in this example, I'm interested to store the login status, the user ID, username, and email. So these are the information that we have retrieved from database, and we want to store it in our session so that we can use it in multiple pages. The purpose of using session is this is an associative array that allows us to store some user information that after they are especially useful for us to pass the user information to other pages that also require login. So now we have set 4 new variables: login, user ID, user name, and email, and we assign values to these variable. So as login, we have assigned value true. For user ID, we assign the user ID that we retrieve from the members table, and also the name of the user from the member table, and email of the user from the user table. And we have assigned a value to and store and register the new session variables and its values in our session. Now this information is already set. So all the comments here actually are the informations that I have used to do some of the testing. After we register the session, you need to have a code to redirect to profile.php. So from here, we have used the header method in order for us to redirect to send a this is a HTTP header that will help us to redirect the page. So we have to indicate the locations that we want to redirect, which is the profile.php, and pass the action status equals to login underscore success. So this is what we're supposed to do. Register session. So if it is successful, that means that we are able to retrieve the database shows that there is a record exists more than 0. But if let's say the account, when we execute the SQL query, the record does not exist, in the else statement, we know it is an invalid login. We redirect it. We redirect back the users to login.php action equals to login field. We want to pass the status because this is useful later. Later you will see that I will update the login.php file and utilize the action equals to log success this action information to help us to show some messages to inform the user that the login is unsuccessful. So this is actually useful. for us to indicate whether the login is successful or fail or not. Okay, so this is a checking to check whether the email and password exists or not using the is set. So if let's say these two doesn't exist, we will also okay. So this is also another statements just to show to the if it is invalid, we can also prompt the user to enter a valid username and password and give them the login link. So remember, for this file also, since we are using the database, at the end we also have to close the database connections and free the resources. So this is for process login.php. We want to, the purpose of process login is to check whether the login valid or not. Then we will register the user informations in the new session. We set some variables and also store specific user values in these session variables. So next, we'll proceed to login.php to add some PHP codes. So we need to modify, first of all, as I mentioned just now, you need to modify the form actions to process login.php, and the method we have to use post. This one I already mentioned. Next thing, we need to add name for the two inputs in the form. So you need to define specific name. If you have not done it previously in your code, you need to indicate the name that you will use as a key when we pass the user input to the backend. So this is the name that you need to add the name that you want to use. So in this example, I use the email as a key for this input. For password, I define the name password. This will be the key that I will use to store the input value. And in the get actions value, we remember just now in the process login, we actually has passed the action equals to login field or action equals to login field to redirect the unsuccessful login to the login page. So we need to write some codes to check whether we have received this action equals to login underscore field or not. If we receive this message, that means this is an unsuccessful login. This is the login page is not the new login page that the user just opened. That means that it is if we check and we found that they are this is a redirect. The users has been redirected back to the login page due to unsuccessful login. Then we need to prompt users some messages. So for example, we can prompt user these messages: access denied, incorrect username or password. So if you see, this is I have embedded the PHP code here. So this is my form. And now I have before these inputs, I have embedded PHP code here in order to do the checking whether I have received this action parameter or not. So first of all, I will check. This is one of the statements that I use to check whether we use the is set to check whether this exists or not, the actions exist or not. If didn't exist, that means that this is a new request from the user. If we have received, if the URL has passed us the action key, we will specific value. We will cross check whether the action equals to login field or not. So we can see that if it is an invalid login, we will redirect back to the login.php and pass this value login field. So we will do the checking whether if the action exists, we have used the is set, and okay, with this we are checking whether we use the is set to check this exists or not using the get method, super global get array. So if exists, we will check whether the action equals to login field. If yes, we echo this message to inform the user. So I'm using the Bootstrap alert danger message, and this is the message that I have sent to the user. Access denied. In the program we echo access denied, incorrect username or password to tell the user that they have unsuccessful login. So this is the for login part. But if it is successful, we will redirect it back to the profile.php. Okay, so before I come to here, I just demonstrate this to you. So let's say now I will do a login which is unsuccessful. This is a user that we don't have this user email. This user has not been registered in as a member yet. So when I click login, you can see that this message, since I'm using Bootstrap, so you can see it is actually using the alert danger. So it is a pink color one. Access and also showing using these two messages to inform the user that the access denied. So you can see because I embed it before the form, so this message will be printed before the email and password, because I want to inform the user here. So that's why I include my code. So it depends on where you want the message to prompt. So of course we need to this message will at least give users the knowing that they are redirect back to this login page because they have entered either incorrect username or incorrect password. And now they need to re-enter a valid password. So now if it is successful, we know we have to redirect to profile.php, right? In the previous lab, we have write the profile.php, but we used we have the codes that read the last line of Java member.txt. Now we have to update the profile.php file to include in order to use to continue the sessions after login. Profile.php is a profile page that the user can only access, should be the page that the user can only access after they log in. So since we are going to check whether the this is if anyone try to open profile.php, we will have to check whether this is a login user or not. So so that's why we also need to use session here. So any page that you need to use the session informations, you must use the start session function again. So that this will create the sessions to ensure that only the login user can access the authorized JavaJam Compiler profile page. So in your profile.php, you have to add this. And of course, because the profile.php, we are going to retrieve the user information from the database again, so we need to include the config file. So you need to call the session start function to start the session, and also include the database connection file. So if you scroll down, now we have to check whether the session is set or not. Because when we in the process login, if our code is successful, if the login is valid, supposingly we already register these 4 session variables. So now you can see that we want to check whether the session is set or not, and some of the session variable exists or not. We want to check the login, these sessions, the login, whether it is equals to true or not. Only when the login equals to true, like what we have written earlier. If the login equals to true, this indicate that the login is successful. So we want to check whether this is equals to true or not. So this is a sample code to the isSet to help us to, we use the isSet function to check whether this session variable exists or not. Because we want to later we will also use the information. So if you see here, the isSet will check whether these three variables exist or not, the login, user ID, and user email. We also have an operator here to check whether the login equals to true or not. So this must be both valid, then only we can we will follow by, we will show the user their profile. So after we have do the checking, if correct, we will get the login members user ID, unit ID, because this unit ID will help us to retrieve this all the information related to this user. So the user ID is important. So a lot of time, because the session's purpose is to ensure that we can monitor and also control this particular session for this user. And we can define a new variable ID to store this session information. And I also want you to print a message to welcome the login user. So for this, we will use the MySQL select SQL statement to retrieve user profile information and show it to the user. But if the session is not set, let's say anyone try to open the profile page before login, we should prevent the unauthorized access and display a message to the user. So if that's why we need to have an if-else statement. If valid one, then we will redirect, show them their login information, their profile information, and print a message to welcome them. But else, we will show that a message to prevent the user and inform that only login and also authorized member can access the profile page. Now, if you look, and this is the sample code. After we add the sessions and include the database file, we have to scroll down to embed our PHP code. So this is the PHP code that we have embedded. It's the part. So first, as I have mentioned in the lab exercise, we will use the isSet statement to do the checking. We will check whether this session variable, login variable exists or not, user ID variable exists or not, user email variable exists or not. And we also use the AND operator to check if exists and whether the login variable is set to true or not. If the value is set to true, that means this is the session has already been created and this is a successful login. If this is okay, then we define a variable called ID to store the session information, and this later we will use this variable in other part. So the concept is similar to super global array post, but because sessions we will use it in the multiple pages as long as we already registered the session. Before you unset the session, right, the session informations can be used in multiple pages. When we log out, then this, of course, this will be destroyed and clear. Because later we want to show the profile information, so when it is a valid login, we write the SQL statement, the select statement, and save it in the SQL variable and execute the query. So the results of the execution we store in this variable, result variable. So after we select we retrieve the information using the select statement. In this example, we have used the while loop to retrieve the information that we have collected using the fetch array functions. Okay, we get this. We pass in the result, and we store it in this array rest. And for this, now we retrieve. I want to retrieve the name and email from the table. So actually, so this is the part that we use the SQL statement to retrieve If let's say they are in the profile, there are more information, not only name and email. You also can add in to other informations. But in this example, since I only have two, we only ask the user to when the user sign up, we only include the name and email. So this is the only two things that we retrieve. But if let's say you have other things that later the user can update the profile, then you can also display other retrieve other attributes. And close the connection. And this is the welcome message, and I echo it using the username, the name of the user. I echo the name of the user, we embed it and welcome the user. So we will be able to greet the user. And next we want to show the profile informations, their name and their email. Echo username and also echo email. So this one, because we already store it, and this is the information that we retrieve from database. Of course, in the reason why we have to we execute the SQL, you may think that we also have the information stored in the sessions that you can reuse. But normally in profile, right, we actually the members' informations in the real case, we will have more than name, email, and password that we store in the members table. So that's the reason why we'll use the select statements to select all the member information. Then whatever information that we want to display in the profile, we can retrieve it from the database. So normally sessions only store the important one, like for example the user ID, the user email, or some of the status. So after we echo, we will be able to see the right information retrieved from the database for this particular user that log into the system. Okay, now I will do a quick demo. Okay. Now I will enter a value. Okay, so you can see now the name of the user has been retrieved from the database second row, and this is and also the email, and display in this is the welcome message with the username and the profile information. So after, let's say after the user login, the user can access different file, any files that only that require login. Remember, you must start the session first, so that you can also use the sessions that already store the session values that store in the variables that we have registered in process login.php. So if any other files that you need to use session, you must start the session first, because this will help us to continue the session after login, and also can check whether this user is an authorized user or not. So last thing for the logout, when we log out, then when the user log out from the system, we need to remember we have to write codes to start a session, because the session still exists when the user after the user login. So we must any things involved with session, we must start the session first. Then next we have to call the function to unset the register session variables and destroy the session. And lastly, I want you to write the code to display a message to inform the users that they have logged out from the system. Now we come to logout page. Call the session start function. We start the session, and now this is one of the example. We can store the old session if we want to check whether user is still logged in or not. Sometimes the people can call the logout page from their browser history. They may accidentally open the logout page again. So to be safe, you can define a variable to an array variables to store the session information that we have now. This is we indicate as an old user, because just in case after logout, if let's say anyone accidentally open from the browser history, then at least we can prevent that to happen. So for logout, we have to unset the variable. So we unset each of these variable valid user. When I process login, right, I've defined 4 variables here. So now I unset one by one to clear the value from the session. So I unset these 4 variables and also destroy the whole session to successfully log out, to ensure that the user will log out from the system. So when we use unset line, we want to unset the element. When we use destroy, we will clean up the session ID. So after you do this, now I also include the HTML part. And you can see in the PHP code, right, we have actually include to check whether this is an empty one or not. This is the if else statement is to prevent just in case if any users that have accidentally opened the logout page again. So we will have this to check whether this exists or not, the old user. If it is not empty, that means if not empty, this we already pass in the existing user session ID. Then we will call the message you have been logged out. If let's say this is the empty one, that means that the user already logged out and accidentally opened the logout page. Then we print echo this message. You will not log in, and so you have not been logged out. This is just to show in case if anyone accidentally open the page. So we can use this to as a prevention. The if else statement will help us to do some checking. Okay, so if I click logout, you can see that the status we have from the user a message we have logged out. So now in case if let's say if after I log out, and if now I open in another, I open this page again, it will shows me this. Okay, so this one, because I think I've done, there are some issues in the in this, but actually the main things that I want to show you is we want to indicate to in case just to prevent that the user will not log in. Okay, so this is after logout, we send this message. This one is optional. In case if you want to just to do some further checking, you can have this if else statement to check whether this user already just to inform user to check whether the just in case if any user accidentally click the open the logout page. Okay, so this is the just some simple solutions for the first for the task 1. Later I will have another video to demo the sample codes for task 2.